Hugo Lowell, political investigations reporter for The Guardian. Jeremy Saland, criminal defense attorney and former assistant district attorney in the trial division of the Manhattan DA's office. And Barbara McQuaid, a veteran federal prosecutor and former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. Hugo, you were sitting right in front of me today, definitely taking better notes than I was. What was your biggest takeaway?
I think Cohen. Cohen testified today that in a 2018 letter to the FEC, he said he did not think the Stormy Daniels payment amounted to campaign contributions or campaign expenses. And today on the stand, he walked that back and said, actually, in 2018, I knew full well that they were campaign contributions. And to me, that was really important because Michael Cohen has now made two links to Trump. He has said that Trump knew about the falsification in his prior testimony, and today he linked him to the campaign contributions violation. And that's the first time he has done that, and that is the only time that has come out. And despite what you think about Michael Cohen's credibility, when you take those two things together, I thought that was a really important moment.
Huge, important moment for Hugo, who covers this day in and day out and remembers all of those facts. But I just kept thinking about that jury today. Right, Laura Jarrett was reporting that those jurors, some of them were rubbing their eyes, appearing restless. How hard is it for them, right? This point that Hugo brings up, that's this hugely important point, are they even getting it, amass the amount of just details and information and bickering and objecting that's happening in that courtroom?
You know, I feel a little bit like a broken record. I think many people, including myself, have said repeatedly there's diminishing returns if you keep on going at something that doesn't need that continued attention. And at some point, after you've made your point, you lose your jury. And you don't want to lose your jury. And on top of that, if you become combative and aggressive and you have issues with the judge and the court, that just makes matters worse. And there was one point in this, pardon me, not in the summation, but in the cross-examination, Blanche was asking a question about, about lying in the past, and then ultimately asked a question that sort of sank his entire cross-examination. You just got to let it go and move on. And that's the problem. They didn't do that. They didn't hit their points and go to the next one.
They being Blanche, the defense.
They being Blanche, absolutely.
Barb, the judge is trying to make this whole process as clean and fair as possible. He made the decision today that closing arguments would be after the long weekend, next Tuesday. What's your take, thinking about the jury, their fatigue, their ability to get influenced over a long weekend, or facts in their minds start to fade away over time?
Yes, so I think what the judge is trying to do is to make sure that the jury hears both closing arguments in close proximity to each other. So what he wants to avoid is having, for example, the prosecution close on Thursday. We have a day off Friday as well as Monday, and then it's not until next Tuesday that they hear the defense case, and then they begin deliberating 4 days after they heard the prosecution case, when they may have forgotten some of those details. And so I think that despite the fact that it might be less efficient than it could otherwise be, it might add an extra day at the back end. The thought is, let's put these two closing arguments together so that the jury is able to assess them both kind of all at the same time. And I think that's a good move. I also think it's a good move to get this long holiday weekend behind us so that the jury isn't trying to race to finish up in time for the long weekend. Sometimes you see that jury verdicts often come back on Fridays because they don't want to come back after the weekend. And so I think by saying at the outset, look, we're going to take the weekend off and then we're all coming back, the judge has made it clear what the game plan is going forward to be fair to both sides.
Hugo, I want to talk about language that we heard today, language around Trump's businesses, right? Like phrases like friends in high places, we're going to stay strong, or who's going down, right? Ideas that someone's going to get grossed up, meaning the lawyer will be paid more, or employee possibly getting a retainer, the idea not to use email or text messages or sending checks to a bodyguard. None of the things I just laid out are how good, honest businesses operate. Yet Donald Trump ran, still today claims to be the CEO president of a business that's clearly not being run on the up and up.
The language evokes a mafia kind of organization, and I don't think you can get away from that. And this has been the kind of theme that has pervaded all the way through this trial, is all of these guys involved in the various transactions and the hush money and the repayment. Even today, Bob Costello, the witness that the defense put on him was supposed to support Trump's case, came across as a guy who was trying to cover it all up, and he was the kind of the cleanup job. And when you think about it like that, it kind of suggests that Trump had all of these guys around him to clean up what he knew was wrongdoing. And if that's the idea that the jury takes away to deliberation, then you've already done 50% of the job for the prosecution, because the prosecution only needs to show that there was a cover-up.
But like a mob boss, didn't sign his name and surrounded himself with hitmen.
I would take that theme even further. And as the prosecution, you're going to go and say, you don't like Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen's a bad actor. Michael Cohen has done some bad things. But who are you going to get to point to the worst guy? And I use this expression, or not use this term before. He's the Henry Hill. He's the Sammy the Bull. He's the one who's getting the main bad guy and going with that mob thing. Whether this is a new Teflon Don, we'll find out soon enough. But that's what you want to do. You don't want him to date your daughter. You don't want him to marry your sister. You don't want him to be your brother. But that's not what we're here about. We're here about him telling what happened and telling it truthfully today, knowing full well when he stepped in that courtroom, he was going to be ridiculed, torn down, and ripped apart. But he still came and he still told you the truth.
Barb, do you think the prosecution made their case?
Yeah, of course, the relevant decision maker here is the jury, who have been in court every single day, listening to every word of testimony and reviewing every exhibit, and then will deliberate together. So it's difficult to predict what a jury will do. But if you look at what their task was, proving that Donald Trump caused the falsification of business records for the purpose of concealing other crimes, that is, campaign finance violations, then yeah, the evidence is all there. The pieces are all there. They brought in evidence well beyond the testimony of Michael Cohen, who, my guess is a jury will even say, we don't want, let's look at this whole case even without Michael Cohen and see if it makes sense. And I think they've got the case there even without Michael Cohen. They have got the financial records. They have got David Pecker explaining what the whole conspiracy was all about, being the eyes and ears. They've got Hope Hicks involved. So I think that the case has been made. The question will be whether the jury sees it that way and whether the government, in their view, has met its burden beyond a reasonable doubt unanimously.
Hugo, Trump keeps saying that the court and the surrounding area, the entire neighborhood, is locked down so tight that his supporters who want to be there for him can't get near even the neighborhood. You and I were both there. We know that is an out-and-out lie. But I want to play some of Trump's claim side by side with the video that I took on my own little phone of what it looks like outside the courtroom. Watch this.
Outside looks like it's supposed to be Fort Knox. There are more police than I've ever seen anywhere because they don't want to have anybody come down. There's not a civilian within 3 blocks of the courthouse.
Okay, for fact's sake, we were there. You can see plenty of people milling about. That is directly across the street from the courthouse. People are sitting there eating their lunch. There are barricades up. The press is there, reporting the news. There are orderly lines with people waiting to go into the courthouse. And then there's a wide open park right there where protesters, anti-protesters, anyone in the world can show up and speak their piece. And there was a handful of people there.
Yeah, and in the morning when we were lining up, it actually became a bit of a fight between 2 single protesters who were trying to carve out their own territory. There was
2 individuals.
2 individuals, and then one was singing, and then the other one had a big sign about Todd Blanche and, whether they would call Trump to testify. And then these 2 people were having a fight amongst themselves over who should have more territory in the park to protest. But it's a big park, and the idea that, people cannot come out and protest for him is nonsense. And part of the reason Trump is saying that, kind of according to our reporting, people inside his orbit, is because Trump is personally offended that his supporters have not come to New York to protest him, and as a result, this is why he is protected.
Okay, but crowds aren't the only thing he's misrepresenting. It's things that are more dangerous than that, because Trump and his surrogates keep saying that Donald Trump wants to testify, but they won't let him, right? His attorneys won't let him. I don't know, maybe the court won't let him. But give me a break, Jeremy. Donald Trump doesn't listen to his attorneys. These are people that he pays. And the court isn't preventing him from testifying. But this is misinformation he's pushing out there. I guarantee by the weekend when I see my parents and they say, well, isn't it too bad Donald Trump didn't get to make his case? What do you do with this kind of misrepresentation of facts, i.e. big fat lies?
Well, he's perpetrating a fraud, no asterisk there, outside of the courtroom, period. Fortunately, the prosecution's job is not to fight what happens outside of the courtroom, inside the courtroom. They're going to stick to the four corners of that indictment. It's not about Michael Cohen. It's not about the bogus that's spewing from the mouth of Donald Trump either. It's about whether these business records are falsified. And at the end of the day, they want to be able to look at that scoreboard with that W and say, we won, not because of what Donald Trump misrepresented outside, not because Donald Trump is trying to tear down the whole system because he doesn't care about anything but himself outside that courtroom, not because we think it's politics. He can testify. He can speak about the case. It's a limited gag order, too. But Donald Trump is solely about Donald Trump outside of that courtroom, and he doesn't have, as I said before, the chutzpah to get in front of that jury and use his mouth and talk to that jury because he will get eviscerated by his own words and by the prosecution.
Barb, I want to talk about context because I'm not condoning Michael Cohen's actions, but there's context we have to talk about because Fox News is freaking out over the revelation that Cohen stole 30 grand from the Trump organization, calling it a bombshell. But Donald Trump is famous for not paying people who work for him. His own comptroller testified under oath in this trial that Donald Trump told him to never pay full price on an invoice. Wait until they keep coming after you, and then renegotiate what you're going to pay. So don't we have to put it into context who Michael Cohen was working for and the way this business operated?
Absolutely, and that's going to be the strategy that the prosecution uses in closing argument, no doubt. And, this wasn't a bombshell. I think that, testimony is in the eye of the beholder. This fact actually came out in Michael Cohen's direct examination last week. And so the idea that somehow it was discovered today is really not accurate. But there are commentators suggesting that it was some sort of a bombshell. I've seen defense attorneys do this from time to time where they act like they're stunned and they've discovered something amazing. And the jury knows better because they've been watching all along. And so I think sometimes that can make a mountain out of a molehill and backfire on a defense attorney. But what I expect to hear from the prosecution in closing argument is to say things like, is Michael Cohen a despicable rat? You bet he is. And you know who he worked for? Donald Trump. We didn't pick Michael Cohen to be a witness in this case. Donald Trump picked him when he decided to hire him as his lawyer and kept him in the fold for 10 years. He was the guy, he was the pit bull he sent out to negotiate all of these contracts. It's Donald Trump's guy. And so if you don't like him, you don't have to. That doesn't matter. What matters here is the facts you heard here in court. And does his story make common sense and line up with the rest of the evidence that you heard? So that's the work that they have to find that Michael Cohen can do for them.
All right, then. Barb, Hugo, Jeremy, thank you all so much. But before we go to break,